Now, for this sermon to you confirmants, we've been thinking about this a lot, and I want to talk to you about three important characters in the Old Testament who I think are incredibly helpful for us and have a word for us as you continue to live your life. I'm not going to take time to read all of these scriptures, but I'm going to tell you the story. And the verse that is coming to me is that Jesus said to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, and all your strength. And I'm going to talk about heart, mind, and strength. And there's a quote there by Nelson Mandela at the very bottom of that bookmark that you got, that it falls upon a generation to be great, and he calls upon your generation, and there's so many of you, you have a chance of being great and being greatness, and let it blossom. And that's a lot of what I want to say to you today. But leaning into greatness, David, Solomon, and Esther. And real quickly, David, the time has come for there to be a new king in Israel. Saul has been the king. He's in disfavor with God. And Samuel comes to Jesse in Bethlehem, the father of David and several other sons, to anoint a new king. And so Jesse brings out the oldest, and God says to Samuel, that's not the one. Brings out the next one, that's not the one. Brings out the next one, brings out the next one. And finally, Samuel says to Jesse, do you have any other sons? This was a day when only men could do these things, but thank God that's changing. He said, well, there's one, he's really small, and he's the youngest, and son of the run of the litter. It's sort of what the Hebrew says, but he's out taking care of the sheep. He said, we're not moving until he comes, so go get him. So they bring David in, and David is the king, becomes the king. He's anointed there. And God says to Samuel something that I want you to just emblazon in your heart and mind, that God doesn't look on the outward appearance but looks on your heart. God doesn't look on the outward appearance but looks on your heart. And that's really hard for any of us in this society today to believe, because there's so much emphasis, isn't there, on how we look. But God looks on your heart and what's going on there. And David's heart is right with God, and David is in tune with God, and David's heart is big with God, and David becomes a mighty king. And there are three things that David does that I want you to hear me say today. David did things really well that he didn't know he would have to do later on. Now, what's that mean? When David was watching the sheep, you know what he did? To protect the sheep, that was his main goal, protecting the sheep. What did he do? Does anybody know what he had a thing, what's this called? Slingshot, put stones in it, and he would use it to fight off the lions and the bears that came, because there were there. And he honed that down really well, not knowing that one day he would have to confront Goliath, or one day he would be a head of a military thing. And there's going to be things that you do each day, each week of your lives, and you're thinking, why did my parents want me to do this? Why am I doing this? And it's partly their way of training and helping you to learn the skills that someday you're going to use in a big way. The second thing David did, I think, out there in the hills of Judea, was he spent time alone with God. He practiced his music. He listened to music. He wrote songs that became the Psalms in the Old Testament. And I just encourage you to spend some time with God. The other thing he did, he became a dear friend. He became a friend to Jonathan. They were like this. And everybody needs to be a friend, and to have a friend, and to live not just in themselves, but kind of be there for somebody else. So the first person is David, had a heart for God. God doesn't look on the outward appearance. God looks on the heart. When I said David did some things to prepare himself that he didn't know what would be, Nelson Mandela. Could you bring up Nelson Mandela's picture? He's a giant. You all probably know him. Nelson Mandela, giant in our lifetime, died recently. Was a leader in the resistance against segregation. They call it apartheid in South Africa. I was put in jail for 27 years. In jail, he let his heart be in tune with God, so that when he got out, he wasn't overly bitter or angry. And when he became the president of the country, he worked for peace and reconciliation rather than civil war, which plagues so many of the countries of Africa and other parts of the world, that we somehow can all live together. And when he was in prison, he studied to become a lawyer, Nelson Mandela. The other picture I want you to see is this next one. I can never remember her name. Is it Lucida? Who? Lohita. Now, you might think this is counterintuitive because I'm talking about God doesn't judge by outward appearance, and she has been named the most beautiful woman in the world. But when she gave her Academy Award speech for the Best Supporting Actress, it was electrifying. And she lived from within some sort of inner dynamic. And the story I saw in relation to her recently was, we still look so much on outward appearances in this culture. And there was a study of children looking, young children looking at different color of dolls. Did you see this? And the tendency was to have preference for the blonde, white doll and not the deeper, darker black doll. That's a reflection of our culture more than, because we look at the outward appearances. And so I'm grateful for who she is. Now, let's move quickly to Solomon. So his heart, Solomon was becoming the next king after David. Solomon was David's son. And he prayed to God, and his prayer was, God, grant me wisdom. Grant me a discerning mind, a discerning heart. And that's what I covet for you and pray for you, that you'll have lots of wisdom, that you'll be humble enough throughout your lives to ask God for wisdom. Because just as Solomon realized, he was in a job too big for himself. And we're at our best when we realize that. And right after he becomes king, there's this powerful story in the book of Kings that, maybe you know it, but I want to walk it through with you. That two mothers had, in the same room, each one had a baby. Do you know this story? Each one had a baby. And they were in the same room, and in that night, one of their babies died. And the mother of the one whose child died, she woke up, realized that, and switched the babies with the other mom. The other mom realized eventually what happened, and they contested about this baby. And they each claimed the baby that was alive. And they couldn't decide. They didn't have DNA then. They didn't have lots of ways to decide that we do. So they brought in the baby and the situation to the king. Now, what would you do if you were king? What would you do? How would you help decide? What would you do with this baby that two mothers both claimed to have as their mom, and you had to decide? Anybody got an idea? We need wisdom, don't we? So Solomon, guess what Solomon did? He asked for a sword. And he said, look, we can't decide, so take this sword and split the baby right in two. I asked the last congregation, I said, do you think I should tell that story to these folks? And they said, hey, they see a lot more graphic stuff than that on television or movies. So right before the guy was going to split the baby in two, the mother, the real mother, acting out of tremendous love and compassion, said, no. Give the baby to the other person. Don't kill this child. And the other mother said, if I can't have her, nobody can have her. Go ahead and kill the child. The one mother who was the real mother, loved this child, would rather give the child over than for that child to be injured or hurt or killed. That's a powerful story that everybody then celebrated Solomon's wisdom. But it's not just about the baby. It's about life. It's about whether you're going to live out of a sense of love or a sense of self-centered power. You hear me? Because the mother, the one who wasn't the real mother, she didn't care. She had a sense of selfishness and power. The real mother lived out of love. And you and I are going to have those choices all through our lives. Am I going to act out of a sense of love, or am I going to act out of a sense of power? And I hope you'll take the wise way of love. Then quickly, the third one, Esther, like our Esther, came into the kingdom at such a time as this because there was a bad guy named Haman in the Israel who was had a plot to kill all the Jewish people. Anti-Semitism, bullying is not a new thing. It was an old thing. And Esther's uncle said, you've got to speak up, and it was dangerous for her too, but she did speak up, saved the lives of her people. And I just want to say this real quickly because we're really almost out of time. What one person can do is huge. A young woman gave a speech at Rotary last week, the speech contest. She was from Santa Fe High School. It was a great speech. And she, I think, won first place or tied for first place. And she was talking, she's overweight. She's talking about her life. She said, kids would pick on me, but one friend stepped up for me. One friend changed my life. You can be that friend. There's a grandfather in this congregation who got on Kiva, that place where you do microloans around the world, because $50 here doesn't mean a lot, but $50 someplace else can be hugely important. He invested $200. He gets online and watches it. He's transferred that now to his grandchildren, who now are involved with microloans, these microloans, all over the world. One thing can change a life. You can be the Esther. You can be the one life that can change others. So let me pray with you, if you would. God, I just pray that for these confirmands that you'll give them a heart like David's, that they'll withstand the sort of enormous pressures of society that says how you look is more important than what your heart is like. And we know that's not true. We know that what God said is right, that God looks on not on the outward appearance, but on the heart. So keep their hearts, my heart, our hearts, all of our hearts, in tune with you. I pray for them and for myself and for all of us here that we might seek your wisdom, that we might have the humility to ask, God, I don't know exactly what I'm doing. I need your help and guidance and your wisdom. And give us then the courage and the strength of Esther to stand up to bullying, to stand up to those who would do the wrong things, and be your people in this time, because it does fall on generations to be great. And this group of 65 or 66 or 64, that they might be your people today and forever, and that down the road we'll look back and know that they lived up into the calling of God upon their lives. And we give you thanks. In the name of Christ our Lord, amen.